Greetings, my dear viewers. It is I, Drayhan, and I am currently suffering through this year's allergy season. So if my voice sounds off throughout this recording, I do apologize. My allergies like to annoy me in many different ways, and this year it has been decided that I've got a sore, scratchy throat. Let's hope it doesn't go anything beyond that. Anywho, we are talking about the actual last ancestry within Howl of the Wild, the Surki. Beetle-like humanoids that hail from the Darklands. Pathfinder's version of the Underdark. And, oh boy, is there some interesting lore tied into this ancestry. Not directly, but we'll get into that. Starting things off is a ancestry feat that I do want to point out. I don't like doing this too often, but it is of note that the ancestry feat secondary adaptation lets you choose a secondary heritage. Let that sink in. This ancestry lets you pick 2 heritages when you make a character. Granted, this is a 5th level feat. So, you could still have only 1 ancestry. 1 heritage on this ancestry, but the implications for character creation are astronomical with this one feat. It's great. I love it. Probably the only real factor about these guys that I like. I nearly forgot about these guys. They were just sort of a footnote compared to the other ancestries. But I was mistaken. These should not have been forgotten. And let me tell you why with a little history lesson for Paizo's Galarian. Starting things off with Eredin, the first mortal to have ascended to godhood, suddenly dies. No reason has been given for his death. He just dies. Some people believe he just disappeared, and his divine connection to the world of Galarian was just severed. But for all intents and purposes, Eredin is the first deity in Paizo's current history to have died. Well, that's a lie, he's not the first. But he's the first of note. He just dies. And his death is very significant for the world of Galarian, because just shortly after his death, a tree that was infused with his essence also dies, but also a rift to the outer realms. The plane of demons opens up. This planar tear is known as the World Wound, and it opens up at 4606 AR. And demons are just ravaging the landscape in the immediate area of this World Wound, which is not a small area, mind you. This World Wound stretches a great distance. I will not cover the exact places this World Wound goes through, but just to note that It goes far down into the depths, past even the Darklands. And this wound stayed open for years, and long enough for a demon lord of locusts, Descari, to start to form a cult in this area. This wound was open for so long that it took 5 crusades before the world wound could finally close. In the year 4718 AR, over 100 years. Crazy. Now, upon the closing of the world wound is when the Surki begin their generational dig. This generational dig happens every few generations. Of course, it's a generational dig. But what is to note here is that the closing of the world wound had caused one of the biggest digs in recorded history, which is why we have the Surki here on Galarian today. Now, that being said, let's go ahead and get into the ancestry itself. For heritages, we have Breaker Surki, Elytron Surki, Hardshell Surki, and Lantern Surki. The Breakers are your diggers. The Elytron have wings. Hardshell have a harder carapace. And the Lantern Surki, of course, are illuminated. For backgrounds, there weren't any recommendations. But from what I gather, many Surki would probably take up being a deckhand, or a root worker, a sailor, a scout. But because of their relation to the Earth, I thought it would be a disservice to exclude the elementally infused Earth. Of course, the basic background to have with most ancestries is, of course, the emissary. Now, it does say that the Surki even took time to catalog and study the different plants and animals of their new home. So, food trader, herbalist, a scavenger, perhaps, maybe even the translator, wanderlust, maybe the warrior, and the waste walker. Some minor backgrounds that I would recommend would be the menagerie dung sweeper, nocturnal navigator, the spell seeker, tinker, and the junk collector and junker. Now, what's with the magical misfit? Well, the Surki do not consume food like every other humanoid does. They consume magic. They are filter feeders, taking in magical energies from the air, the soil, the water, from many different minerals. I gotta say, I'm impressed. An interesting character design for sure. Someone who eats magic. They'll go around and collect a few minor magical trinkets and absorb the magic from them. It's interesting. I like it. Now, for classes, it is recommended to have a Surki champion, druid, or ranger. But I can definitely see a few other classes getting thrown into the mix, possibly like the thaumaturge. Perhaps even the exemplar. Maybe. That one's a stretch. But why don't we go ahead and take a look at each of the classes that have currently been released and see what characters we can make for a Surki. I do want to point out that as of this recording, the exemplar has not been released yet because that was in War of Immortals, so keep that in mind. Once it does release, I will be including it in these videos. But for now, the exemplar is not a part of this content. Starting things off with the alchemist. Now, I thought it'd be fun to point out the bombardier beetle and the scorpion beetle. Two beetles that would make for fun inspiration for a Surki character, who is in fact a beetle. So the alchemist of the bomber and toxicologist would make the most sense if you're going for the route of just using the animal kingdom as inspiration. Next is the barbarian. There are a lot of different beetles that have various different shapes of horns and are even called various different weird names, such as a scorpion beetle or otherwise. Some beetles even have stingers, which is fascinating, so the instinct of the animal using the ant, deer, scorpion, or wasp would make perfect sense. And of course, the elemental earth is going to be on here as well as the giant instinct. Moving on over to the bard, surprise, surprise, Zoophonia is here once again, but so is the warrior. Moving on to champion, I wasn't actually sure what type of champion cause would work for the Surki, but I think that the grandeur and redemption causes could work. More leaning towards grandeur, but redemption is sort of there. Not for its namesake of someone who is seeking redemption for themselves, but someone who is seeking redemption for others. Moving on to the cleric. Of course, we are going with the cloistered scholar, though it is stated that some Surki will, in fact, choose a war priest domain, a doctrine, or even serve gods of war and death, since they are a part of the natural life cycle. Which is interesting. Now, as far as deities go, we are only given 2 recommendations. Of course, the first is going to be Gozre, the wind and the waves. But the second one is known as the dragon eagle, Sturovenin, of the Sarkorian gods. This is the area where the world wound was open and was shut, and where most Surki surfaced during their generational dig. Now, here's another history lesson for you. As of War of Immortals, which has not been released yet, this god, the dragon eagle, is dead. How did he die? Well, upon the death of the war god Gorum, a shard of this war god fell to Galarian and threatened to reopen the world wound. Starovanin took it upon himself to chase after this shard, grab it, and fly skyward to take the shard as far away from the world wound as possible. There was a cost, though, as this shard soon exploded, killing the dragon eagle instantly. A noble sacrifice for sure. So I do kind of see some exemplar Surki in the future, seeing as Starovanin was indeed one of the Surki gods. Not one of the progenitor gods, but one of the gods the Surki did indeed serve. Other gods that are listed are of the domains of change and of travel. Here is a list of each of those gods in the respective domains, if you would like to take a look. Moving on to the Druid. The Druidic orders of Animal, Leaf, Stone, and Untamed seem to be the most fitting. Moving on to Gunslinger. For your Gunslinger ways, the Triggerbrand and the Vanguard would be the most appropriate, but the Spell Shot, I think, would be an interesting choice. Simply for the fact that the Surki do seek out magic, more to consume, but also to study, which could be an interesting character. Next is the Investigator. For your methodologies, I would recommend the Empiricism and Forensic Medicine. Next is the Magus. For your hybrid studies, the Sparkling Target and Twisting Tree would be the most appropriate for a Surki character. Next is the Oracle. For your mysteries, ancestors, battle, and life were the only ones that I could find to be the most appropriate. I don't think there are going to be too many Surki oracles, but it was good to mention them. Next is the Rogue, and for your rackets, I would recommend the Eldritch Trickster, Mastermind, and the Thief. Next is the Sorcerer. Going back to the World Wound, since there are still some demons running amok after the World Wound's closing, it would stand to reason that there would be some Surki who are influenced by these demonic powers, especially since the World Wound was open for over 100 years. So the bloodline of Demonic, Elemental Earth, and Imperial would make the most sense. Next is the Witch. For your patron themes, I would recommend the Devourer of Decay, Mosquito Witch, Spinner of Threads, Whisperer of Wings, and Wilding Steward. And finally, for our Wizard, probably not a very common class for sure, but it would stand to reason that there would be at least a couple. For your arcane schools, I would recommend the Civic Wizardry and Unified Magical Theory. And that is all for today's video. What did you think of the Surki? Let me know in the comment section down below. And until next time, this has been Drehan, and I am offline.